And welcome back to TIA Now's Connected Vehicle Series. We're here with Shaylin Batt. He's Executive Director for the Colorado Department of Transportation. And Shaylin, welcome to the program.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
Well, thanks for being here. I want to start, before we get into sort of the nitty-gritty of what's going on in the intelligent transportation system space, talking about some of the primary initiatives over at CDOT. Can I call it CDOT?
Please.
And in particular, an initiative called RoadX.
Yeah, so I've been a Deputy Executive Director in the Kentucky Transportation Cabinet, Secretary of Transportation in Delaware, at the Federal Highway Administration. And so every time you go somewhere, you're like, what is the challenge I'm trying to figure out here? When I got to Colorado, I realized that we had a transportation system from the 1950s that was designed in the 50s, built in the 60s for a population of the 1980s that was about 3 million. We're at 6 million people now. We're going to 8 million people in the next 20 years. And so we realized we couldn't just build our way out of that congestion. We were going to have to operate the system much more effectively. And so RoadX was our idea around, there are a ton of great ideas in the private sector that need a place to be deployed. And we said, with RoadX, come private sector, give us your ideas, and we'll deploy them, and hopefully we can save lives or make people's lives better.
Now, there's a number of research areas that I know that you're familiar with. I'd like to list those and just give me your feedback on them. The first one is V2X applications.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so V2X applications, there's a lot of apps that are out there. And so in this connected vehicle space, V2I is the infrastructure, V2V is to vehicles, V2X, there are various applications and things that are out there. So that interface between the consumer as a driver, this is where we're hoping to see a lot of progress in the next few years.
Another research area is CV security and V2I standards. If you can start with security.
So security is the big enchilada. Right, so we talk about how do I reduce or eliminate these 35,000 deaths a year, but in a connected world, you could also see how all of these vehicles driving around would be an enticing target from hackers who just want to cause some mischief to more significant events. And so the security of the system is incredibly important. One thing I would point out in this sphere, though, even if we don't move down the road of you and I not driving these vehicles in a few years in a more autonomous sense, if you have a tire pressure monitoring system on your vehicle, that is a broadcast point. The way that sensor turns on your dash is the tire experiences a loss of pressure and starts broadcasting a Bluetooth signal to your computer nerve center. That is something that is hackable today. Right, some of these Bluetooth systems in the stereo. So whether we move to a connected or autonomous future, we're going to have to figure out this vehicle security issue. It's a big deal for us, but I think the benefits outweigh the risks, and hopefully we're not deterring people from looking at this.
Now, the V2I standards.
Yeah, V2I standards are incredibly important. That's why we have the V2I Deployment Coalition, which is made up of state DOTs, AASHTO, ITE, ITS America, and then all of the OEMs, the manufacturers who are in this space. What we want to make sure is that if a vehicle departs Boston heading for California and is going to drive through all the states in between there, that we have a common set of infrastructure, and that's why the V2I Deployment Coalition is so focused on getting these standards right and then adopted so that you don't have different standards as you cross jurisdictional lines.
I want to ask you about research in infrastructure as far as V2I. What are some of the challenges and obstacles there?
So it's the term research, when I started my career, implied you had a hypothesis and you went out and tested things and then you made a determination. There was this rigorous academic process that took a fairly lengthy period of time because you had to have good results on the other side. What is challenging now, not just in the tech world for transportation, but for everybody, is that the speed of technology is such that if I take a traditional academic research process and apply it to a problem, by the time I go through my rigorous academic process and come out with a decision or a finding that can help me with a decision, that technology is now 2 years in the past. And so I think that one of the things that we're going to have to reconcile as a society is how comfortable are we and how do we adapt all of these different institutions, research included, to move at the speed of technology, which is only increasing in speed.
The next one is vehicle to infrastructure policies, and I know that's a broad area. Can you touch on something in that area?
Yeah, V2I policy is, there's a number of policy areas that need to be determined. I mean, there's different states are passing different legislation around, connected and autonomous vehicles, standards. To me, there's that old beta VHS, conundrum from the late 70s, early 80s. Nobody wants to go out there and put out a bunch of Betamax if VHS is going to be the standard. So whether it's DSRC or cellular, that's something that's kind of TBD. Our challenge in the public sector is we have long procurement and long lead times around some of these infrastructure projects. I'm working on a $1.2 billion project to replace a viaduct in Denver that's been 13 years in the environmental process. And the life of that project will likely be 50 to 75 years. Well, how do I take an unknown future around some of these policies with V2I, and how do I know what I need to put in now, what do I need to build right now, and how do I make it resilient as it goes forward? So there's a lot of stuff coming at us, and we're just going to have to be as nimble as we can be and make good data-driven decisions, recognizing that we don't know what the ultimate outcome is going to be.
You mentioned DSRC technology. What's CDOT's view on that, and what are the arguments on both sides? To be in fairness, there's arguments on both, or is it a debate at all? Is it not a debate?
Oh, it's definitely a debate between DSRC and cellular. Without going into too much detail, there's a latency or speed of transmission of information, and so there are folks who say, well, DSRC is so much quicker. And so you need that latency, you need that quick turnaround. And other folks who say that for a lot of this V2I stuff, cellular provides a better network and it's a lot cheaper, it's existing, it's out there. And when 5G gets here in a few years, that will overcome the latency issue. So again, if you're looking at it from a more academic standpoint, there are a lot of things that we can sit back and debate. But to me, this is a chicken or egg argument that is before us right now. And we're going to have to make some decisions. And we're fully recognizing that we're probably going to make a couple of bad decisions. We just have to learn from it and not make those same mistakes again.
What are the primary privacy issues that you're seeing for the connected vehicle? Is it mostly from the consumer vantage point or from industry vantage point, or both?
Everybody's incredibly concerned about privacy, as they should be, when it comes to vehicles being tracked from a vehicle miles traveled or road usage charge perspective. But ironically, some of the same people who will complain about privacy with a vehicle will still have a Facebook account and put a lot of their information out there. If you're carrying a cell phone and you haven't disabled a lot of the technologies within the cell phone, your location and various things are being not only broadcast but recorded. Your internet searches and various different things. So I feel like transportation is sort of number 27 on this list of significant privacy issues that we need to look at. But it in and of itself should not be held up as a reason why we shouldn't be moving forward. If we have a privacy issue, we should solve the privacy issue outside of the transportation area, because it shouldn't really make a difference, and we can find ways to cleanse the data so that it doesn't really know where your car is. But if your phone is already broadcasting to the guy that is buying the data about your shopping preferences, well, then we've got a bit of a disconnect.
So when talking about the intelligent transportation system, what would be the foremost challenge that you can think of right now, let's say over the next 12 months?
I'll step away from the 12 months and just say there are short-term and long-term challenges to ITS. I would say in the short term, we're going to have to figure out this somewhat messy future in the short term and short to medium term of connected and unconnected and autonomous vehicles all existing in the same ecosystem. So, we were just in a meeting with some folks from France because the European Union is going through some of this, and they were just talking about how autonomous vehicles, when they are subjected in an urban environment to merging vehicles, are hyper cautionary and slow down, and that has a much bigger impact on the system because they are being as defensive as possible, which they should be. But if I introduce those onto my system and now I have these vehicles that are introducing artificial speed brakes into the system, I'm not optimizing my system. Also, as much as we don't like to talk about it, there are lots of lots of communication that takes place between drivers that you can't replicate from a V2V standpoint. So, if I wave at a driver to say, "Hey, let me in," that doesn't translate from a V2V section. Or there are certain digits of the hand that can express things much more effectively, than a computer can. So we're going to have to figure that out. In the long term, privacy is a big deal. And then, to me, the biggest long-term issue around this is cybersecurity. And even though there is an analogy between, in my mind, connected vehicles and the aviation industry, I mean, people who complain about connected vehicles or autonomous vehicles may not realize that planes are mostly autonomous now, with pilots still there, able to take over, but the vast majority of the flying is done by computers. But we're going to have a much bigger system in terms of access points and security. That, to me, is the biggest long-term issue we've got to resolve.
So I want to get clarification on the U.S. Department of Transportation. Have they put their stamp of approval, per se, on DSRC technology? Is that the case?
I would say that if you go and ask the average U.S. DOT employee, is DSRC the choice of U.S. DOT, I think that by and large they would say yes. And there's a reason for that, because there's a lot of, we know about the 5.9 spectrum, we know what it can do, versus the 5G isn't even a thing yet in terms of what it will eventually be. And so I think that they are pretty much settled on DSRC as the ultimate standard, which is why the rulemaking is incredibly important that we've gone through. And again, like a lot of things, it's sort of to be determined as to whether or not it's the ultimate technology that gets adopted.
Now, from a business case point of view, OEM, car manufacturers, suppliers of those manufacturers are likely behind DSRC. It creates higher production and allows those vehicles to get on the road faster. Is that the case?
Well, I can't speak for an OEM. I do speak with them. I think that they're just trying to figure out the business case. And I think that if there are ways for car manufacturers to install features that save lives and make their customer experience better, they're going to do that. There's also a regulatory environment that comes in. If you look at some of the cars that get produced for the North American market, they're very different because of the standards that we have. They're very different than some of the exact same models that get produced for other markets because of different standards. And so it's a balance of what the consumer is demanding versus what regulators are demanding. And I think we're just going to have to navigate that over the next few years.
In addition to the policy discussion between maybe a public and private partnership, the technology side of that discussion, what's going on with the public and private sector right now as far as that dialogue?
There's a lot of dialogue between the public and the private sector right now, but it's coming in fits and starts. So a few years ago, I think that there was more reticence around some of that conversation. Very proprietary, this is my idea. And so we've gone to them, and there's a few different groups that are coming together. There's a connected autonomous vehicle executive leadership team. I'm on that, and bringing together the public, the OEMs, the various stakeholders that are involved. And some of the conversations that we've had there, it's been interesting. There were assumptions made on both sides about the quality of the data, or what it is that we were privy to when you went behind the curtain, and we didn't really know what we didn't know. And now that we've started that conversation, it's better. And so the conversation is improving. We're going to have to get there. We all talk about big data. To me, the question is, how do you turn that big data into information? And that's what's key. So if I can get data out of these cars that tell me how to operate my system more effectively, that's a win. If we can get data from our system to these manufacturers so they can build a better mousetrap, I think it's a win-win, and that's the perfect example of a public-private partnership.
I want to talk, I have a couple more questions. I want to talk first about the adoption of the connected vehicle, or in time, the autonomous vehicle, by stating that there's a fundamental difference between human instinct and programmed machines. How do you think that affects the adoption of these technologies?
Yeah, there's a big ethical debate right now. I remember in one of my philosophy classes in college, there's you have one kidney and you've got this wealthy older person or a mother or a whatever, and sort of who gets the kidney, right? And so there's this debate about now if one of these connected or autonomous vehicles has to choose between hitting a dog or hitting a minivan with a family in it or hitting a pedestrian, what are the ethical choices that go into that? I think that's a little Hollywood, a little extreme. Maybe that scenario comes up. I think the whole point of connected autonomous is that the vehicle doesn't get to that point in the decision tree because it would have recognized the system would have been providing feedback, and it would have eliminated the ability for that vehicle to get into that situation. We seem to have a different standard for connected autonomous vehicles than we do for everything else. And that's both completely understandable and a little perplexing. And I'll give you an example. Last year, we all heard about the Tesla that crashed in Florida. And I won't go into the details, but people said, well, look, there's an autonomous vehicle that's crashed. Well, one, it wasn't an autonomous vehicle. It's a beta application that you're supposed to still have your hands on the wheel. And so yes, it's driving, but you should still be driving as well. And somebody died that day in Florida, but 100 other people died that day across the country. We lost 35,092 people last year. That's the equivalent of a 747 crashing every single week. And yet we have this 100% standard on the connected autonomous side. And that's okay if that's what we got to get to, but we shouldn't lose sight of the forest because of the trees. And we have a public safety crisis in this country where we're losing 35,000 Americans a year. And so we're going to have to be able to accept the fact that, yeah, we're going to have to relinquish control to these vehicles. And maybe there's a scenario whereby it gets into a situation that it has to make a tough choice and not hold that computer to a different standard, because a lot of humans are making the same choice today and we're losing a lot of them.
And Shailin, thanks for your time.
Thank you very much.